Okay, so I think I'm gonna shift to something a little bit different and a little bit more theoretical, but I will keep it quite short. So I'm gonna talk about systems thinking for sustainable development. And the way I see systems thinking is that it's a little bit like the theoretical side of integrated urban planning. So basically, I want to just introduce you to it, get you to understand what it is about, and also get you to think a little bit about what different things influence each other when you intervene in the urban environment. I'm also going to talk a little bit about the sustainable development goals, because I think you need to know about them. And also there are a lot of interrelationships between them, which fits in with the concept of systems thinking. So first of all, what is it? Has anyone heard of it? Either here or online? Yeah, I can see the people online, so I don't know if anyone's lifting their hand. If you want to speak online, you will just have to put your microphone on and speak. Okay, so no one has heard of it before, no problem. That's fine. It's sometimes I say it's a fairly complex concept. In fact, it's actually fairly common sense, I should say. That when you look at something, you can see how it might affect other things and how other things might be affected by it. It's just that as you focus on an object or on a subject, you might not be familiar with everything else. So it takes a bit of time or a bit of expertise, or you need to talk to other people who know things that are related to what you're studying or what you're practicing on. I'll try, I got this actually from a really good blog on the Medium platform. The title is How Jokes Normally Start. And it says a linear thinker, a design thinker, and a system thinker walk into a bar. So what's the difference between them? I'd actually, when I found this, I had not heard of a linear thinker. So maybe I'm past one stage already. Maybe those of you who are in the architecture degree might have heard of design thinking. Has anyone heard of design thinking? I know someone here should have, because she was in a workshop about design thinking. But I'll explain each of them. So what does linear thinking do? It breaks the world into smaller parts and focuses on each one separately. So it's good because it's an architectural example. I know there might be some engineers here as well. We'll get to know you later on. But what does a linear thinker do? Probably maybe what you did in your first year, or probably even before you came into your first year, is they draw a floor plan. And they detail where the bedrooms are, where the kitchen is, where the bathroom is, where the sitting room is, and so on. And it makes sure that every room has light, either through a window or electrical light, that there is heating, that you have a right number of plugs to put in your electrical items, that they're in the right place, that you can reach them, and so on. What does a design thinker do? So it takes this floor plan and he starts making a list of what the people who will be living in here actually want. So he might talk to them, he might interview them, or he might actually even observe them in the flat or house that they're living in the moment, at the moment, before moving into this new one. He also asks them about what they wish for their house to be, and they say that they want to be really environmentally friendly. That might be because they want to cut down their bills, but that's what they say. So then instead he gets his floor plan, and with it he designs a house that runs on solar energy. And he uses materials that are highly insulating, they optimize energy use, he orientates in a way that takes advantage of light and wind for radiation and so on. And then maybe he changes spaces a bit so that they actually fit in with the kind of family that the house needs to host, whether they're going to have children, they're not going to have children. They say they're not going to have children, but they're going to end up having children anyway. It takes into account all these things. Then it comes to the systems thinker. And he says, well, actually, okay, this is all very well, but in the future, this house will be in a city that it's a smart city. In this city, most people will be spending most of their time outdoors because they live a lot, because we made really nice public spaces, because we've provided shade, because, and so on and so forth. So actually, they will only be using this home pretty much to sleep. And the materials that are being planned for the house are not going to last forever. And they're very costly, although they're very energy efficient. And they're very difficult to recycle. So then he finds out that, well, actually these materials also have some elements, some nanomaterials that once they get to the end of their life, they get into the air and they affect human health. So the whole house in the end could cause more harm than good, but it depends how much energy it's saving over its lifetime. So he starts sketching how the energy will flow among different buildings and different spaces in the city, and how what the balance is between cost effectiveness, impact on health, and so on. And then he plans out sort of a broader picture where the house fits in with where the energy hubs on, with how energy is transported from one place to another, and so on. So, if you're building your own house, which one would you pick to design your house? Honestly. Not the first one, not the linear thinker.
The system one, the system one.
The system one, says Yanis. Why the system one, Yanni?
Because he takes a more holistic view with but really, I mean, because he has a more takes into account these different issues, and even if it's in my house, I care about them.
Okay, you care about them. I personally would be a bit worried that the system thinker will design a house that really has nothing to do with what I want.
Okay, yeah.
Or they might even he might put the plugs behind my bed and the switches behind the door and things that happen normally nowadays anyway. So I don't know what's the best solution. But I guess really there needs to be a balance between all these things when you're designing or building a house. So if you pick a linear thinker, then you might get sort of stuck in the details of things and miss the bigger picture. And then end up with a very low energy efficient home. if you pick the design thinker, you might end up creating perhaps a beautiful home, a nice solution, an energy efficient one, but maybe it's looking at the wrong problem because the problem in the wider world is a different. There's a much bigger problem in the wider world that they are not looking at. I think the most difficult thing with system thinkers and the idea of systems thinking in general is that you end up discussing all sorts of possibilities and then considering all possible futures, all possible causes, all possible effects, and then you end up not being able to do anything at all and not actually be able to design a place at all. So if you can get all three to work together, I think it's actually the best solution. So, you know, you might get the system thinker identifying key problems, the design thinker working on sort of customized, tailored solutions, and then the linear thinker looking at the details of the implementation and sort of fixing the details. However, I think it's also true that as a society overall until now, we have mostly been using linear thinking. We have been focusing and relying on linear thinking to solve problems. So this is normal, and I think we still do this in education. We are taught to do this at school. You get a big problem and you break it down into small pieces, which is fine because it's also age appropriate. Addressing complex problem comes with experience. So, you know, we do need to break problems into smaller, more manageable parts, and this has actually solved a lot of scientific problems in the past. But the world is becoming more complex, and there are a lot of complex problems that are actually persisting, like Luca was saying in his first lecture. We do these small changes, but it's been very, very hard to see big changes. So we make efforts to solve problems, but because we break things down, then we cannot address the bigger pictures. So examples, systems thinking, I'm not actually 100% sure. I think maybe the concept has been applied a lot in public health before urban planning. And what happens is you see many solutions that are developed through linear thinking that initially work, actually, but then they lead to more problems. Bacterial resistance is one of them. We develop antibiotics, they solve one problem, but then bacteria become more and more resistant, and then we create stronger bacteria and we cannot fight them anymore. Another example might be poverty relief programs in aid, where they do a relief scheme. It's very well-meaning. It solves a property problem for a limited amount of time, and then we see that in those areas poverty increases even more than it was before. So it's really when you're working to tackle complex problems that maybe you need to shift a bit more towards the systems thinking approach. So the definition. So it's considered a set of skills, basically, that you develop, acquire, and they are used to improve your capability of identifying and understanding systems, predicting their behaviors, and designing modifications or interventions in order to produce an effect that you want. Specifically in the context of urban planning, systems thinking is an approach that views cities and urban environments as complex. We know they are. We know cities are very, very complex objects, and they are interconnected systems. Just think about the infrastructures within cities and between cities. They are highly, all the elements within cities and cities themselves are highly interconnected. So he emphasizes the relationships and the interdependencies among various components, including infrastructure, transportation, social dynamics, and the environment. And these are things that Stefanos already mentioned when talking about integrated urban planning. So it's a holistic perspective, this in the same way as integrated urban planning do, and it helps analyze the dynamics and sometimes unpredictable outcomes of urban systems. And it does this ideally to help you plan more effective and more sustainable cities. So why is systems thinking important? Cities have a huge impact on climate change if you take cities as a whole, with all their transport infrastructures, energy systems, heating and cooling systems, and so on. So they are they consume a lot of energy. They have very dense populations, most of them, a lot of them, and therefore they are a hotspot for carbon emissions. So at the moment, over 50% of the global population lives in cities. This depends how you measure cities. It depends whether you measure compact centers or you include suburbs and satellite towns. It can go up to 80% of people currently living in urban areas. They do generate money. They are economic machines. They generate basically 80% of the global economic output. Still, we need the countryside we still need the countryside to provide us with food. And they also generate more than 70% of greenhouse gas emissions. So, you know, it's a huge share compared to the whole world. It's predicted that by 2050, cities will increase by an additional 2.5 billion people. I'm not saying almost the whole world will live in urban areas, but the great majority will live in urban areas. And we need to address their complexity in order to address mostly their emissions and make them climate resilience and addressing urban change, as well as addressing their social infrastructure and having sustainable communities, not just a sustainable environment. So it is still all about sustainability, which is what this course is about. Have you heard of the Sustainable Development Goals? Someone has, yes. Okay, a few more than system thinking, good. So the Sustainable Development Goals were adopted in 2015 by the United Nations members, and they were created as a target to reach, as a desirable aim that countries, nations have. And the aim is that of peace and prosperity for people and the planet, while tackling climate change and working to preserve oceans and forests. So the SDG, as you can see, they cover a lot of elements, a lot of issues, and they highlight the connections between the environmental, social, and economic aspects of sustainable development. Now, they were adopted in 2015 with an aim for them to be reached by 2030. We are practically 5 years away. Bad news, as some of you who have heard of them might know. No chance we are going to meet probably all of them, likely most of them, probably all of them. The ones in the worst conditions are inequalities. They're rising globally and in most places anyway, so much that balancing out. Globally, they're rising. Climate change, and related to climate change, biodiversity. We haven't managed to stop the loss of environment biodiversity, both in terms of flora and fauna. So why they haven't been effective? They have had political impact. We talk a lot about it. They have influenced a lot of debate. And so they have had a discursive effect in global and national debates. However, when it comes to nation states at the individual level, there has been no transformative changes in policy and institutional structures. And I think this again links back to Luca's talk that when you want to achieve transformative change, you need 3 different kinds of powers and, what did he call them? I learned something today. Politics, institutional, prefigurative, and contentious. Of course, within the scope of this course, the most relevant to us is SDG 11, Sustainable Cities and Communities. It has 10 targets to be achieved, 15 indicators to measure these targets. The targets are actually split between sort of 7 outcomes and 3 means of implementation. I will show them to you. Multi-level governance is not a target and is not a mean of implementation specifically for SDG 11. And by that, I mean different departments. In this case, let's say local authorities, because we're talking about cities working together. That is in itself number 17. It's a separate goal in itself that institutions should partner with each other and also with other stakeholders. So systems thinking here is needed to understand also the trade-off between goals. Because when we look at the goals, often we also, different interventions, different programs address them individually. So you might say, probably the most famous one is number 1, no poverty, but that over time has always meant increased output of GDP, and we know that output consumes natural resources. So if you try to decrease poverty that way, then you're impacting on the environment at the other end. So that is where systems thinking comes in terms of sustainable development. So it's meant to improve the understanding of how ecological, cultural, epidemiological, public health, built environment factors interact with each other. And whether trade-offs should be defined and agreed in specific situations. So whenever someone actually implements an action to improve an SDG, to try and achieve, support achieving an SDG target, they should declare whether they think it has a negative impact somewhere else. So here, it's also linked to the concept of co-benefits. I don't know if you've heard about that, but there is where you're trying to do an intervention in a specific field, but you only do it if you know it has benefits in other things as well. So this is just to show how SDG 11 links to all the others. Most issues in the SDGs, in the different SDGs, have an urban interpretation. So if you look at poverty, there's an issue such as energy poverty. It's an urban issue. You might not be able to afford heating and cooling your home, depending on how well insulated it is, and so on. So it just shows plausible relations between 11 and all the others. And it's not necessarily exhaustive, but it just shows the urban challenges and goals can support the fulfillment of other goals. Again, we also have to bear in mind that they might impact on other goals. So here are the targets, basically. So it goes 1 to 7 are actual outcomes that they want to achieve. Affordable housing is probably one that is certainly far from being reached, at least in the Western world, or at least quality, affordable housing everywhere. It ranges from things like housing, participatory practices, safeguarding heritage, protection from disasters, and so on. So what is a system's approach to urban infrastructure delivery? It's about creating healthy and productive urban spaces that avoid sprawl, reduce carbon emissions, and improve residents' well-being. This material is from a report by the World Economic Forum, which is on the list of your supporting materials. So if you want to get into more detail in this subject, you can look at it. It applies forward-looking spatial and land use planning. It integrates green buildings and streets, renewable energy, and nature-based solutions. Green features prominently in systems thinking towards urban development, for urban development. And that is because it has a lot of co-benefits for the other goals, but also for mitigating the effects of other sustainable development interventions. And I'm referring to the earlier discussion about density and how density, by creating more density, you might increase the urban island effect. You remove surfaces, which may be which are soft surfaces, permeable surfaces, surfaces that drain off water. And so you get more gray surface area, you risk more, you increase the risk of flooding, you get more water runoff, your water gets polluted, and so on. So I think it's one of the most powerful elements for mitigating the negative effects of increasing density. It's about simultaneously managing and evolving multiple infrastructure sectors. Infrastructure is also becoming more complex. For example, the 15-minute city model, and the 15-minute city model, it might be a buzzword. It actually existed long before the term was created, but it does remain a very effective way of managing cities and infrastructures. So I will go into a case study to break the rhythm a bit, and looking at Melbourne. in Australia. So Melbourne was a very, very sprawling city in the 1980s, and it has a central business district like many, many Anglo-Saxon cities. We have one in Nicosia as well. What happens in these places is that the working day ends, everyone goes home, the place is empty. So it's basically a lot of land, a lot of buildings that are used less than 0.5% of the time. Typical example here in Nicosia, we have as you all know, we have many empty plots which are used for parking. In the central business district, a lot of them belong to large companies and corporate companies. They are closed off from 5 p.m. They're empty, no one can use them. At the weekend, they're empty, no one can use them, neither for parking or anything else. It's a huge amount of land and unused infrastructure. So they decided to do something about it because it was increasingly inefficient and unsustainable. And it was interesting because the idea for the intervention came from the state government, not because they had so much of an issue with the central business district in itself, because the costs to provide infrastructure to the suburbs were skyrocketing. And then they realized that the reason why they had this really huge cost is that most of the city center was completely unused. So they took advantage of a property market crash in the 1980s, and they addressed the problem in two ways, basically. One was through a specific initiative, intervention, and the other one was through research. So the intervention was called Postcode 3000, and it was an initiative addressing the central business district in itself. So it was addressing the problem of oversupply. So there was a lot of empty new commercial office space. And they decided to convert these into residential accommodation. So the central business district started getting more used 24/7, and they started reducing commuting, and they started limiting the expansion of the city over the city boundaries. So it was about making more efficient use of existing infrastructure. Then they took also a research approach, and they decided to develop a plan based on a study which was called Transforming Australian Cities. And the study showed that Melbourne could double its population, without expanding the city boundaries and building all residential developments to double the population on existing available space near transport connections. So that was very, very important, because that meant to the state government that if they did this, they didn't have additional or no additional substantial infrastructure cost, because might need to increase the frequency of trains or the frequency of buses, but they didn't have to build new rail lines, or they didn't have to build new stations. So this kind of intensification saved a lot of land, and it also started generating financial benefits, because then new uses were created in the business district, including hospitality for meetings, for visiting offices, retail, and so on. So it had a lot of impact. Of course, this was a very long-term plan. Initially, it was 15 years, but then it continued, it became even longer. Melbourne has been voted in the last few years one of the most livable cities in the world. It eliminated embodied energy. They had a huge population increase in the business district itself. We're talking 685 people that were living there in the 80s to over 40,000. They managed to double the population without the appropriation of any agricultural land. A lot of savings on infrastructure costs, and many, many others, really. They also managed to do this building pretty low rise, as you can see. Actually, density can be achieved with compact housing and not very high rise. I'm running out of time. So I managed to give you one example, which is what I wanted to do. Let me just check. You have the rest of the presentation on the platform. But let me just check if there is anything more that I wanted to mention. No, I think it's okay. So you have the case study summary of Melbourne in the course material on the platform. That's it.